On the banks of the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., there sits a complex of buildings. With its curving architecture and prestigious address, it was designed to be a symbol of modern American luxury. Instead, it became a symbol of political corruption. This is the Watergate. To the casual observer in 1972, the United States was a superpower in transition. But beneath the surface, a constitutional crisis was brewing that would shake the very foundations of the Republic. This wasn't just about a break-in, it was about the abuse of power at the highest level. Over the next hour, we are going to unravel the tangled web of the Watergate scandal. We will move from the dark corners of a parking garage to the bright lights of the Senate hearings. We will witness how a paranoia-fueled administration tried to steal an election they were already winning, and how the system fought back. This is the story of the years 1972 to 1974, the years the president went to war with the truth. To understand the crime, you must understand the mindset. Richard Nixon was elected in 1968 into a country tearing itself apart. The Vietnam War was raging, and protests filled the streets. Nixon saw enemies everywhere. He didn't just see political opponents, he saw existential threats to his authority. This paranoia was fueled by leaks, most notably the Pentagon Papers, which exposed the government's secret history of the Vietnam War. In response, the White House went rogue. They created a secret unit known as the Plumbers. Their job description was simple: stop the leaks. But their methods were illegal. They existed to discredit political opponents viewed as enemies of the state. This unit operated in the shadows, bypassing the FBI and the CIA. They were the president's private enforcers, and soon they would turn their attention from stopping leaks to winning the 1972 election by any means necessary. The night was June 17, 1972. A security guard at the Watergate complex noticed a piece of tape covering the latch of a door. He removed it. When he came back later, the tape had been replaced. He called the police. Inside the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee, police found 5 men. They weren't ordinary thieves. They were wearing business suits and surgical gloves. They were arrested while wiretapping phones and photographing documents. But it was what they had in their pockets that raised eyebrows. Crisp $100 bills, sophisticated surveillance equipment, and a notebook containing the phone number of a White House official. The White House press secretary immediately dismissed the incident. He called it a third-rate burglary attempt. The public moved on, unaware that this was the tip of an iceberg that would sink a presidency. The police had the burglars, but they didn't have the motive. Why would 5 men break into the DNC? The answer lay in the money. Investigations began to reveal a disturbing connection. The burglars weren't independent operators. They were linked to the Committee to Re-elect the President, unironically abbreviated as CREEP. One of the arrested men, James McCord, was actually the security director for the committee. The money trail was even more damning. Checks found in the bank accounts of the burglars were traced directly back to Nixon campaign donors. This wasn't just a burglary. It was a black op funded by campaign contributions. The operation was designed to gather intelligence to ensure Nixon's victory. The question now was, how high up did the knowledge of this operation go? Was it just a rogue committee, or was it ordered from the Oval Office? In November 1972, while the burglars sat in jail and the cover-up operated in the shadows, America went to the polls. The result was a historic landslide. Richard Nixon won 49 out of 50 states, crushing his opponent George McGovern. He won more than 60% of the popular vote. The tragedy of Watergate is in this math. Nixon didn't need to cheat. He was popular. The public saw a strong leader who was winding down the Vietnam War and opening relations with China. But as the balloons fell and the champagne popped, a cancer was growing. The cover-up was proceeding secretly behind the scenes. Documents were being shredded, hush money was being paid to the burglars, and the CIA was being pressured to halt the FBI investigation. The president had won the election, but he had already lost his moral mandate. While the rest of the Washington press corps accepted the third-rate burglary explanation, two young reporters at the Washington Post kept digging. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were young, hungry, and persistent. They noticed that the story didn't add up. Why did the burglars have a White House phone number? Why were high-priced lawyers showing up to defend them? They adopted a simple strategy: follow the money. Night after night, they worked the phones and knocked on doors. While other media outlets ignored the story, dismissing it as a minor crime, Woodward and Bernstein uncovered a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage. They wrote story after story, linking the break-in to the highest levels of the Justice Department and the White House. They were keeping the flame of truth alive when everyone else wanted to blow it out. Woodward had a secret weapon, a source known only by the code name Deep Throat. Their meetings were straight out of a spy novel. Woodward would move a flower pot on his balcony to signal a meeting. They would meet in the dead of night in an underground parking garage. Deep Throat didn't give Woodward documents, he gave him guidance. He confirmed facts and steered the reporters away from false leads. He told them that the conspiracy was vast, involving the FBI, the CIA, and the Justice Department. For decades, his identity was the greatest mystery in American journalism. It wasn't until 2005 that he was revealed to be Mark Felt, the Associate Director of the FBI. Felt was frustrated by the Nixon administration's attempts to control the Bureau's investigation. He leaked the truth to save the institution he served. In January 1973, the Watergate burglars went on trial. The judge was John Sirica, known as Maximum John, for his harsh sentencing. Sirica wasn't buying the story. He didn't believe these men acted alone. He suspected a broader conspiracy and was determined to break the code of silence. He used the only tool he had: fear. He threatened the burglars with maximum sentences, up to 40 years in prison if they didn't cooperate. The pressure worked. Days before sentencing, James McCord cracked. He sent a letter to the judge. In it, he admitted that perjury had been committed during the trial, that the defendants had been pressured to plead guilty, and, most importantly, that the White House was involved. The dam had broken. In the summer of 1973, the scandal moved from the newspapers to the living rooms of America. The Senate Watergate hearings began. They were televised live, day after day. It became a national soap opera. The committee was chaired by Senator Sam Ervin, a delightfully folksy constitutional scholar from North Carolina who became an unlikely folk hero. The hearings were devastating. Witness after witness peeled back the layers of the administration. But the central question was coined by Senator Howard Baker: what did the president know, and when did he know it? This simple question shifted public opinion. It wasn't just about a break-in anymore. It was about the integrity of the president. The hearings transformed Watergate from a political scandal into a moral reckoning. The star witness was John Dean, the former White House counsel. Young, polished, and possessing a photographic memory, Dean sat before the committee and did the unthinkable. He accused the President of the United States of being a co-conspirator. Dean testified that Nixon was deeply involved in the cover-up. He famously told Nixon that the conspiracy was a cancer on the presidency that was growing out of control. He detailed meetings where hush money was discussed and where perjury was planned. It was explosive, but there was a problem. It was John Dean's word against the president's. Nixon denied everything. To the public, it was a stalemate. Who do you believe? A convicted lawyer or the leader of the free world? Then on July 13th, 1973, a surprise witness changed history. Alexander Butterfield, a former presidential aide, was asked a routine question by investigators. Was there any recording system in the White House? Butterfield hesitated, then answered, "I was aware of listening devices. Yes." The room went silent. Butterfield testified that Nixon had installed a voice-activated taping system that recorded all Oval Office conversations. Nixon had done it to preserve his legacy for history. The irony was crushing. The very system Nixon installed to ensure his place in history would destroy it. The tapes contained the undeniable truth. They were the ultimate witness. If Dean was lying, the tapes would prove it. If Nixon was lying, the tapes would prove that too. The existence of the tapes triggered a ferocious legal battle. The special prosecutor appointed to investigate the scandal, Archibald Cox, immediately subpoenaed the tapes. Nixon refused. He claimed executive privilege. He argued that a president must be able to receive confidential advice without fear of it being made public. He claimed that handing over the tapes would endanger national security. It was a constitutional standoff between the executive and judicial branches. Could a president hide evidence of a crime behind the shield of his office? The country held its breath as the legal arguments flew back and forth. Nixon offered summaries of the tapes, but Cox demanded the raw recordings. Neither man would blink. On the evening of October 20th, 1973, the tension exploded. This event became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon decided he had enough of Archibald Cox. He ordered his Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to fire him. Richardson refused and resigned in protest. Nixon then ordered the Deputy Attorney General, William Ruckelshaus, to fire Cox. He also refused and resigned. Finally, the Solicitor General, Robert Bork, agreed to do the deed. He fired Cox. The White House announced that the office of the special prosecutor was abolished. Nixon thought this would end the investigation. He was wrong. The public reaction was a firestorm. Telegrams flooded Washington. It looked like a dictator's purge. Instead of stopping the investigation, the massacre triggered the first serious calls for impeachment. A legal battle for the tapes eventually reached the Supreme Court in July 1974. The case was United States versus Nixon. Nixon had appointed 4 of the sitting justices, but loyalty to the law outweighed loyalty to the man. In a unanimous 8-0 decision, the court ruled against the president. They declared that while executive privilege exists, it is not absolute. It cannot be used to withhold evidence in a criminal trial. The ruling was clear. Nixon was forced to hand over the tapes. This was a triumph for the American system. It proved a fundamental principle of the Republic. No person, not even the president, is above the law. Nixon was cornered. Nixon complied. He released the tapes. Among them was a recording from June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the break-in. It became known as the smoking gun tape. On the recording, Nixon is heard ordering his chief of staff to tell the CIA to stop the FBI's investigation into the Watergate funding. He wasn't protecting national security. He was protecting himself. It was undeniable proof of obstruction of justice. It proved Nixon had been lying to the nation, his staff, and his family for 2 years. He had orchestrated the cover-up from the very beginning. When this tape was made public, Nixon's remaining political support evaporated. Even his staunchest defenders in Congress wept when they heard it. It was over. The machinery of removal began to turn. The House Judiciary Committee voted to recommend 3 articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon. Article 1, obstruction of justice, for the cover-up and the interference with investigations. Article 2, abuse of power, for using the IRS and FBI to target citizens and enemies. Article 3, contempt of Congress, for refusing subpoenas during the lengthy investigation. These weren't just political charges, they were high crimes and misdemeanors. The full House was virtually guaranteed to impeach him, and the Senate was sure to convict. On August 7, 1974, a group of senior Republican leaders marched into the Oval Office. They delivered a grim message. Mr. President, you do not have the votes to survive. Faced with the certainty of removal, Nixon chose to control his exit. On the evening of August 8th, he addressed the nation from the Oval Office. He announced his resignation, effective the next day at noon. He admitted no guilt, only that he had lost his political base. In his final remarks to his staff, he famously warned against bitterness, but declared, "I have never been a quitter." On August 9th, he boarded Marine One. He flashed a victory sign, or perhaps a sign of defiance, one last time, and flew away into exile. He became the first and only U.S. president to resign. At noon that day, Vice President Gerald Ford took the oath of office in the East Room. Ford was in a unique position. He was the first unelected president in U.S. history. He had only become vice president because Nixon's original VP, Spiro Agnew, had resigned months earlier due to a tax evasion scandal. Ford stood before a traumatized nation and spoke words of healing. "My fellow Americans," he said, "our long national nightmare is over." He was a humble man stepping into a wreckage. His job was not just to govern, but to restore faith in a government that had lied to its people for 2 years. But the nightmare wasn't quite over. The question remained, what to do with Citizen Nixon? Should he be put on trial? 1 month later, in September 1974, Ford made a fateful decision. He granted Richard Nixon a full, free, and absolute pardon for any crimes he may have committed. Ford believed the country needed to heal and move on, rather than endure years of a former president on trial. But the public reaction was furious. They saw it as a corrupt bargain. Why should the foot soldiers go to jail while the leader goes free? The pardon destroyed Ford's popularity instantly. It likely cost him the 1976 election. Nixon accepted the pardon, which legally carried an imputation of guilt, but he never faced a jury. Watergate changed America forever. Its legacy is etched into our political DNA. It caused a permanent decline in public trust in government. Before Watergate, Americans generally believed their president. After Watergate, skepticism became the default. But it also strengthened democracy. It led to reforms like the War Powers Act and a strengthened Freedom of Information Act, designed to check presidential power. It inspired a generation of investigative journalists to hold power accountable. And culturally, it gave us a suffix. To this day, every political scandal is tagged with Gate. It is a constant reminder of the time the system worked, when the press, the courts, and the Congress joined forces to prove that in America, truth can still conquer power.